Okay, here's something that really makes you stop and think. Despite all the progress women have made in education in South Korea, their share of management jobs, it barely moved. It was stuck at like 0.3 to 0.5% both in 2008 and 2017. Really makes you ask, what's actually happening there?
Absolutely. That kind of persistent gender segregation in the job market, I mean, even with other advancement, that's exactly what we're digging into today. We're really focusing on how the skills needed in jobs where women are the majority,
Mhm.
how those skills have changed, especially, with technology coming in.
Right, and this isn't just something that matters if you happen to work in one of those specific fields. Understanding these shifts, well, gives everyone a sort of sneak peek into the future of work, doesn't it? I'm
Yeah.
talking about those aha moments,
Yeah.
where you suddenly see how tech is quietly reshaping even jobs that seemed pretty stable.
hmm And to get a handle on this, we looked at two main data sources. First, there were these Korean local employment surveys, one from 2008 and another from 2017. Those helped us figure out which jobs were female dominated and, crucially, which ones stayed that way.
Okay.
Then, to really understand the skills changing within those jobs, we turned to the U.S. Occupational Information Network, ONET, people usually call it. We used their data from 2002 and 2016.
Okay, hold on. Using U.S. data to look at South Korean jobs, that feels a bit indirect, maybe.
That's a fair point, yeah. But the thing about ONA is its strength lies in just how detailed it is. And it's constantly updated, tracking specific knowledge, skills, abilities for tons of jobs.
Right.
Think of it like this huge ongoing research project mapping out job requirements. Plus, the US labor market, it often adapts a bit faster to tech changes. And since, many jobs share core features across countries these days.
Yeah, makes sense.
Looking at skill shifts in the US can give us really valuable clues about what's probably happening in similar roles elsewhere, like
Oh,
in South Korea. So our analysis, it zeroed in on 181 specific job categories that those Korean surveys flagged as female dominated.
got it. So the mission for this deep dive then is to get a clearer picture of how the skill demands within these specific jobs have changed and what that tells us about, the future of work, how we should be thinking about workforce development, especially for women.
Exactly. What does it all mean going forward?
Okay, so let's unpack this. That South Korean data, just how deeply rooted was this gender segregation?
Well, what's really striking is just how little changed structurally. I mean, you had more women getting degrees, even moving into STEM fields.
Right.
But the overall pattern of which jobs were mostly done by women, it stayed remarkably stable between 2008 and 2017. Get this. In both years, over 76% of employed women were in non-professional roles.
Wow, 76%.
Yeah.
That's huge. Still in non-professional roles. So for the women who were in management or professional jobs, where were those roles concentrated?
It was a pretty narrow band, actually, mostly clustered in areas like education, so teachers, academic staff, that kind of thing. Social welfare, health professions like nursing, and also arts and culture related fields.
Okay. And what about outside those professional jobs? What kind of work consistently showed up as being mostly female?
You saw a really consistent picture across different job types. In offices, things like accounting clerks, secretaries, very heavily female. Service sector, big numbers in beauty, caregiving, food service.
Right.
Sales jobs to retail, direct sales. Even in skilled trades, textiles, food processing, those had more women. And same for simpler labor jobs in services and farming. The main point is just how consistent these sectors were over that whole period, nearly a decade.
Okay, so a very clear, stable picture of where women were working. Now let's shift to the skills.
Yeah.
What did that USONet data show about how the demands changed between 2002 and 2016 in these roles?
Well, overall, the average importance score for skills did go up a bit, from about 2.31 in 2002 to 2.45 in 2016. But the really interesting stuff is when you look at which specific skills jumped the most.
All right, lay it on us. Which skills really gained importance?
Okay, leading the pack were negotiation, that shot up by zero point 0.9 points, and persuasion up by 0.79. Big jumps.
Right.
Then you had others like instructing, coordination, critical thinking, also judgment and decision making, systems analysis, monitoring. Even programming saw an increase.
Programming. Interesting.
Yeah, and also significant bumps for complex problem solving, learning strategies, management of personnel resources, and time management. Quite a list.
That really is a comprehensive list.
Yeah.
So what's the story these increases are telling us? Where were these jobs heading?
It strongly suggests, bigger need for skills around social interaction and communication, negotiation, persuasion, instructing, coordination, that points towards roles needing more teamwork. maybe more client interaction. But it's not just those like traditional people skills. We're also seeing a clear rise in demand for higher level thinking, critical thinking, judgment, understanding systems. And even that small rise in programming, it hints at tech becoming more integrated,
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
And needing to manage people and time better. That points to maybe more responsibility within these roles.
So it's moving beyond just doing the task. Sounds like more strategic thinking, maybe even basic tech know-how was becoming necessary. What about skills that became less important? Did any drop off?
Yes, absolutely. Several skills decreased in importance. The biggest drop was for equipment selection. That went down by over a full point, 1.03. Also decreases for operation and control, mathematics, and installation.
Hmm. Okay. That kind of makes intuitive sense, right? With better tech, maybe you don't need to spend as much time figuring out which machine to use or physically running it or installing things manually. Automation, simplification.
Exactly. And the drop in mathematics is interesting too. It could be, like you said, that software is just doing more of the heavy lifting, the calculations that people used to do by hand or with simpler tools.
Right.
The general decline in those equipment focused skills really highlights how tech is changing the sort of hands on part of many jobs.
Okay. So we've talked about individual skills going up or down, but the research also groups skills together, right? Using principal component analysis.
Yeah.
What did that show about the core skill sets in 2002 versus 2016?
Yeah, the PCA.
Hmm.
This is where you start to see the bigger underlying patterns. Think of it like finding the main ingredients that define a recipe's overall character. So back in 2002, the biggest ingredient, explaining about 33% of the skill variation, was this cluster called high-level cognitive and social skills.
Okay.
This covered things like being able to learn quickly, solve problems, coordinate, think critically, make decisions, having a service orientation, understanding systems, and interestingly, the jobs scoring highest on this: art directors, fashion designers, dietitians, health service managers.
Huh. So even back then, you had this mix of creative, caring, and managing roles needing those advanced skills. What was the next biggest factor in 2002?
Second was machine operation and management skills at 16%. Pretty straightforward maintenance, installation, running machines, monitoring, repair. And the top jobs, as you'd guess, were things like textile machine operators, food processing operators.
Makes sense.
Then we also saw language skills as a distinct factor, about 10% reading, writing, speaking, critical thinking tied to language. Think technical writers, interpreters. Service skills was another one, 9% service focus, social awareness, speaking, listening, coordinating. Waiters, retail staff fit here. And then smaller factors for scientific equipment skills, 6%, and basic calculation skills, 4%.
Okay, so that paints the 2002 picture. Now, fast forward to 2016. How did these fundamental skill groupings change?
Well, that high-level cognitive and social skills factor, it was still the most important, still explaining 33%. But, and this is key, the specific skills making up that cluster actually broadened.
Ah, okay. How so?
It grew to include things like active listening, complex problem solving, learning strategies, managing people, negotiation, persuasion, time management, a wider range. And the top jobs shifted a bit too, now including counselors, social workers, teachers, along with fashion designers still being there.
So the importance held, but the flavor of those high-level skills got richer, more diverse, more management, more interpersonal stuff woven in. What else changed?
Machine operation and management actually went up slightly to 18%. But the really big news was the emergence of completely new factors. Software skills popped up as its own distinct factor, explaining 8% of the variation,
Oh.
driven by skills like programming, reading comprehension, probably for manuals and documentation, digital problem solving, systems analysis, and the top jobs. Biological technicians, desktop publishers. Also new at 8% was resource management skills, managing money, materials, coordinating, managing people.
Yeah.
Chefs, medical and health managers showed up high on this one.
That feels significant. Software skills and managing resources breaking out as their own core components. Any other new ones in 2016?
Yep, two more. Scientific management skills emerged at 7%. This involved analyzing operations, science principles, technology design, problem solving, quality control. Think commercial designers, physical therapists. And finally, instructional skills became its own factor at 5%. Teaching, learning strategies, monitoring progress. Teachers, instructional coordinators were key examples here.
It really sounds like a major reshuffle. Those more isolated language skills, basic math skills.
Yeah.
They kind of faded as core factors, didn't they? And in their place, you get software, broader resource management, scientific management, teaching skills stepping up.
Precisely. It really underscores this trend. Technology and more complex management tasks becoming much more integrated into these jobs traditionally held by women.
It really makes you think how these changes, even in specific sectors, they just echo wider trends across the whole job market. Even if your job isn't considered female-dominated, you can see this pattern, right? Adaptability, digital skills, they're becoming crucial everywhere. It feels like tech is touching almost everything now.
Exactly. And that really brings us to the main takeaways from this whole deep dive.
Okay, let's nail those down. What are the absolute key things we should take away from this analysis?
Okay, first, that persistent gender segregation in South Korea's job market right through that period.
Okay.
Second, the clear rise in importance for those high-level thinking skills, social skills, and resource management abilities in these female-dominated roles.
Got it.
Third, the flip side, the decline in importance for purely manual skills and basic calculation. And finally, fourth, the emergence of those totally new core skill sets, especially software skills and scientific management type skills.
So yeah, it's less about just doing specific tasks and more about thinking critically, working with others, managing things strategically, and crucially, handling technology. What does this mean, bigger picture, for work and education?
Well, the implications are pretty significant, I think. For workforce development, for education policy, there's clearly a need to push digital literacy and STEM-related skills, not just in the usual places, but right within these sectors where women have traditionally worked.
Understanding this changing skill landscape is just vital if we want to create training programs that actually work and make sure everyone, especially women, is ready for what the job market is actually going to demand.
It really does hammer home that need to be ready for constant change in the world of work. Okay, so maybe a final thought to leave everyone chewing on. Given these really quite dramatic shifts in skills, how can we do a better job of helping people build, a really versatile skill set, one that lets them navigate these changes, especially in job sectors that have been so skewed by gender historically? And tied to that, what's the role of just continuous lifelong learning in staying relevant? Definitely something for all of us to think about as we look ahead in our own careers.